What if the United States experienced another Great Depression? The thought itself stirs up a sense of dread, recalling one of the darkest economic periods in modern history, a time of unprecedented unemployment, widespread poverty, bank failures, and social upheaval. While the Great Depression officially began in 1929 and lasted through much of the 1930s, the scars it left on the American psyche and institutions are still studied, debated, and feared to this day. But what if the conditions that sparked such an economic catastrophe were to re-emerge? What would happen to the economy, the people, the government, and the global order? How would modern society, with its complex financial systems, advanced technology, and interconnected markets, respond to a crisis of that magnitude? To explore this hypothetical scenario, we must first understand the causes and consequences of the original Great Depression, and then imagine how history might repeat or differ in today's vastly different world. The Great Depression was triggered by a combination of factors. The stock market crash of 1929, rampant speculation, overproduction in agriculture and manufacturing, widespread bank failures, a collapse in consumer spending, and poor government policy responses. These elements interacted to create a downward spiral that resulted in unemployment rates soaring to nearly 25%, GDP shrinking by almost 30%, and millions of Americans facing homelessness and hunger. The social fabric was tested, with soup kitchens and breadlines becoming symbols of desperation. Fast forward to today, the U.S. economy is far more complex, with globalization, digital finance, and advanced social safety nets. Yet vulnerabilities persist. A sudden collapse in the stock market, coupled with massive corporate debt, high household borrowing, geopolitical conflicts, and climate-related disasters could collectively ignite a crisis. Imagine the stock market plunging 50% or more in a matter of weeks. Consumer confidence evaporates, people stop spending, businesses halt investment, and banks begin to falter under the strain of bad loans. The immediate impact would be catastrophic. Millions could lose their jobs within months. Industries reliant on discretionary spending, such as travel, entertainment, and retail, would be among the hardest hit. Unemployment would spike beyond the official numbers, with many forced to work part-time or gig jobs with no benefits. The housing market would collapse, leading to foreclosures on a massive scale. Homelessness would rise dramatically, and food insecurity would become a widespread crisis. Financial institutions would face unprecedented stress. Unlike the 1930s, today's banks are more interconnected globally, and the financial instruments more complex, but this also means that a failure in one sector could cascade rapidly. Governments would be pressured to intervene with bailouts, stimulus packages, and emergency lending programs. However, political divisions and rising national debts might hinder swift and unified action. Public trust in institutions could erode, fueling social unrest and political polarization. The social consequences of a new Great Depression would be profound. Mental health crises could surge as people struggle with unemployment, poverty, and uncertainty. Educational attainment might decline as families cannot afford tuition or supplies. Crime rates could increase as desperation grows. The already fragile social safety nets, including unemployment insurance and food assistance, would be overwhelmed. States and municipalities facing their own fiscal crises might be forced to cut services, exacerbating hardships. At the global level, the repercussions would be equally severe. The US dollar, the world's reserve currency, would come under pressure. Trade partners would see exports decline sharply, triggering recessions worldwide. International financial markets would experience volatility, and global supply chains could be disrupted. Geopolitical tensions might flare as countries compete for scarce resources and economic dominance. Alliances based on economic cooperation could weaken, making international conflict more likely. Technology, however, could play a dual role. On one hand, automation and AI might accelerate job losses in certain sectors, compounding unemployment. On the other hand, digital finance and remote work could provide resilience in some industries. Governments and private sectors might leverage technology to deliver aid more efficiently, maintain communication, and sustain essential services. Yet, digital divides could deepen inequality, leaving vulnerable populations further behind. Recovery from such a depression would be long and arduous. Lessons from the 1930s suggest that decisive government action through public works, social programs, and regulatory reforms is essential. The scale and scope of stimulus would likely dwarf those of the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic. Infrastructure projects could create millions of jobs while modernizing the country's aging systems. Universal basic income or expanded social welfare programs might be considered to support struggling families. Moreover, a renewed focus on economic diversification could emerge, reducing dependence on volatile sectors and emphasizing sustainable growth. Green energy, technology, healthcare, and education might be prioritized to build a more resilient economy. Political reforms could follow, aiming to address systemic inequalities and restore public faith in institutions. Yet, the risks of political extremism would loom large. Economic despair historically breeds radical ideologies and movements. Governments would need to balance security concerns with protecting civil liberties and fostering social cohesion. Education, community engagement, and inclusive policies would be vital to prevent fragmentation and violence. In the cultural realm, art, literature, and media might reflect the collective trauma and resilience, much as they did in the 1930s. Stories of survival, hope, and solidarity would inspire generations. At the same time, nostalgia for perceived better times could influence politics and social attitudes, sometimes dangerously. In conclusion, a second Great Depression in the United States would be a defining event of the 21st century, challenging every aspect of society. While the country is better equipped with knowledge, technology, and resources, the scale of potential damage is staggering. The scenario underscores the importance of vigilance in economic policy, social safety nets, international cooperation, and community resilience. It is a sobering reminder that prosperity is fragile, and history's darkest chapters can repeat if lessons are forgotten.